Hope you brought your swimsuit. It's time for architecture, coffee, and ink. Hello, this is Hollywood C, and you're listening to Architecture, Coffee, and Ink, a podcast dedicated to introducing concepts, detailing out designs, and tackling the architecture you might not realize the meaning behind. I'm your hostess, and I am here today to start introducing you to the designs that make you wonder why. So I ask you to brew your coffee, grab your sketchbook and pen, and let's begin. Hello, dear listeners, old and new. I am so excited to be talking with everyone this week. I just had my first committee meeting for my thesis at the end of last week, first for this semester. We have discussed a direction and put forward our plans and mapped out where everything is going to be going. In light of that, let me just give everyone an update before the episode starts. And don't panic, architecture, coffee, and ink isn't going away because that kind of sounded like the next thing I was going to say is it's not you, it's me. Moving forwards, I am going to be focusing my thesis on a particular town and a particular building within that town, focusing on interviewing those families, companies, and individuals whose lives were centered around that building and company. From these conversations, I will be translating them into drawings and giving a voice to those who normally go unheard. To drum up some suspense, I think I'll keep the official building quiet until next week. Now, before anyone freaks out or puts the podcast down, I know that for many of you, you are here for the tales of architecture from around the world. So not to worry, each week I will be producing 2 episodes. One titled like normal, which will be our normal global case studies and interviews, and a separate episode that is specific to my thesis. Think of it as getting all of the bonus episodes every single week, and keeping the interest going as I finish up my degree for the next 3 months. But this way, if you don't want to listen to the interviews and conversations, you can just enjoy a normal episode. It should be kicking off next week, but I am tentatively taking a research trip this weekend, so the episode might just have the sound of water and crickets in the background as I record outside. So no worries and no fears. Like anything driven by research, what you started with and the results you projected might not be what shows up with when your study is finished. But what I enjoy most about this plan is that I am going to start tackling all of the promised episodes and still get to talk to some amazing people and firms, and I look forward to continuing this journey with everyone. But in this episode, we are going to be talking about Lake Titicaca, or more aptly, the mystery of Lake Titicaca. In all honesty, there were a lot more #vanlife posts and videos being watched before the research this week. Experiencing the site through different perspectives actually really helps change the understanding of the locations. Shameless self-plug. If you want to learn more about schoolies in the van life, check out the episode from last season with Caleb Brackney. But what I think we as designers are trying to incorporate more in the recent years is the various different ways you can explore a site. Don't get me wrong, we as a profession have a long-standing history with perspectives. But lately, the methods of achieving that perspective have dramatically shifted. For me, starting with some of these social medias and video trends really show how people experience landscape and buildings in a way that we sometimes struggle to convey in conversations alone. Now, obviously, I am a huge talker and enjoy the conversation and conveying what clients need into drawings. But what makes this site so interesting is that we are going to be talking about something that is super old, some are new, and some practices have actually managed to survive multiple generations to today. But before we begin, remember to check your sources, check your facts, and more importantly, check me. I should never be your primary information source. So, without further ado, let's begin. History. So, yes, I actually divided this episode up into titled sections because this location has just an amazing and fascinating history that just boggles the mind. And I will not be able to get through all of the amazing people and culture who lived there. I really encourage you to continue researching this episode, as it is truly an awe-inspiring location that I was barely able to scratch the surface on. But the name of the lake is actually from the Spanish. The original name is considered to be lost, but the current name is Titi, which means Pumbaa, and Caca, which has a series of possible translations, but current theories believe it to be gray. This meaning referring to the stone statues of a gray Pumbaa found on Isle del Sol, one of the islands in the region. Other possibilities of the translation include, quote, Rock of Pumbaa, quote, Lance Point, and quote, Crag of Lead. But overall, I'm going to be focusing on the lake itself and the pre-Columbian Inca and Tiwanaku. So this lake actually straddles the border of Bolivia and Peru, and the border actually dances through the middle of the lake, so bring your passport with you. It is roughly 190 kilometers or 80 kilometers by 80 kilometers, or 118 miles by 50 miles, and averages around 107 meters or 351 feet deep. This 8,372 kilometers squared or 3,232 square miles of lake is actually located way up in the Andes at an elevation of 3,812 meters or 12,507 feet. And when I say elevation, I mean that to the top of the surface reaches that. So if you want to calculate the range of the lake, removing the water, you need to take the elevation that I just gave and subtract the minimum and maximum depth. So basically, the elevation I gave is to the surface of the lake itself. But the lake is considered to be the highest navigable lake, meaning that unlike other lakes, you could technically see barges and commercial crafts around the lake. And it is up in the Andes Mountain and located on the Andean Plateau, I believe. There are over 40 islands. I saw several articles that claimed all different variations of 40 plus, so I'm just going to say 40 to be safe and avoid spreading misinformation. I saw some articles that said 47 islands, some that said 41. I'm not really sure what the discrepancy is and where the double counting is going on, so we're just going to say 40 plus. It is the largest in South America of freshwater lakes and has a strait that connects to the second half of the lake. The deepest part of the lake reaches 280 meters or 920 feet, which is so cool to me because, as many of you have guessed, I absolutely love water. I don't think I have ever fully recovered from my surfing days. There is over 25 plus bodies of water that feed into the lake. But moving into the mystery, the lake has been home to multiple groups of people over its long history. And the most famous names is the Inca and the Tiwanaku. But multiple other tribes and groups have been there, have long since called the region home. The history can basically be divided up into 3 major times according to the UNESCO article. One period prior to people was the start of the Earth until 10,000 BC. The next period is from the 10,000 BC to the 16th century, and then the 16th century to now. And even the 16th century can be further divvied up between the Incas at the beginning and the 16th century end when colonialism kicks off hard. So for the sake of the episode, imagine colonialism as the start of the modern era. The Tiwanaku had a total of maybe 20,000 people, while the Incas were the largest empire in South America and reached a peak after about 1525 and reached a total area of 2 million square kilometers or 770,000 square miles. And that, I swear, is the last of the math. But moving into the story of the people themselves, I wanted to talk about the various cultures that have inhabited the region and the buildings that they left behind. This area was in the news off and on over the past few years, as there have been studies and research done into an underwater temple. And we will return to this in a moment. The lake itself is believed to be an extremely important part of the creation myth for the Incas. It is believed to be the emergent place of Khan Tiwanaku. For him, he crafted humans from stone, the moon, and the sun. And amongst the various islands, you can find the location that the sun and the moon, capitalized because the sun and the moon were deities, found homes for them and their progeny. The remains of the buildings can be scattered across the islands, including the underwater temple. It was also believed to be the home of Manco Capac, the original Incan king. While the land-bound sites all yielded exactly what you'd expect, shards, fragments of bones, art, etc., the same can be said for the underwater temple, including terraces and walls, and enough evidence to support the idea that this area was occupied by both humans and animals and was originally dry land. After a series of studies, including the documentary I watched included in the sources, the decision has been reached to eventually turn the site into an underwater museum. The plans are currently being developed for it to cost a total of 10 million USD or 8.6 million euros to build and construct. The truth is that this location will serve as a homage to all of the cultures and artifacts that were believed to have been the start of several different cultures. The underwater site is believed to be from the Tiwanaku people and is so important because it single-handedly showcases more than we had ever previously known about them, including rituals, ceremonies, and buildings. Additionally, some artifacts look like they were offered to the lake later on, meaning that just because the site was submerged doesn't mean that it was abandoned. If you read up on the subject, you will notice that they discuss several of the offerings and artifacts and mention the reoccurrence of Pumbas, llamas, and several other creatures with gold and other offerings. Many times they were carved from stones and crafted as pendants and used in ceremonies. This belief of the power of the lake has transcended, as there is a belief in a spirit or that the lake itself has mystical properties, with several stories of offerings needed to be made if you take from the lake. Even the Spanish colonizers believed that the people would dump in gold as part of a pilgrimage. But my favorite thing to mention about this lake is the lake monster, because every lake needs a lake monster. It was discussed in the book The Islands of Titicaca and Coiti by Adolf F. Bandlinger in 1910. He credited it to being a seal or a similar creature, and I was extremely disappointed to be unable to find anything else about it that I trusted source-wise at least. Now and then. So I titled and included this section deliberately, and titled it Now and Then because the things that we are going to be talking about include concepts and practices that have been practiced in history for quite a while. The most prominent of these are the floating islands and the waru. So starting first with the waru, this is actually a method of farming using raised beds. When you research it, you'll see some extremely amazing photos that look a lot like crop circles or the Nazca lines. Basically, they look like huge drawings in the ground due to the combination of canals and raised beds. It allows for water to surround the bed and helps maintain the temperatures and controls soil erosion and several other benefits. The most famous images are flat, and the technique is being revitalized, however. However, it does occur vertically up the hill as well, or should I say down the hill, which is the terraces that you, dear listeners, are probably most familiar with. Terraces. I think I called them terraces. I didn't mean that. I'm sorry. Additionally, there is the floating islands, which is made from tutora, a beautiful reedy plant that is used in everything from boats to homes, and more importantly, the floating islands themselves. As the name suggests, the tutora is used to construct the island and anchored with stones to support 5 to 7 residences per island. It needs to be maintained frequently with careful attention to maintenance schedules. But the people themselves are tribal members of the Waru colony and maintain beautiful works and artistry alongside fishing, jewelry, and crafts. When I say beautiful, I do mean that. The entirety of the works and islands that I have seen showcase a deep technical knowledge and mastery of their craft and the way of life. As part of an initiative taken in the 90s and again in 15, solar panels have slowly been integrated into the designs. The homes themselves are often one shared central room. The concept of this has actually sparked several movements, including as far north as British Columbia, Canada, where several other modern floating islands live. I have seen several videos over my lifetime about it, and maybe we'll consider a follow-up episode later on. But back to the tutora plant, it actually has medicinal properties, and this bulrush is actually also used in Easter Island as well. At one point, it was part of an exhibit of a boat made from this plant was included in the Smithsonian. So when I said that it was used in Easter Island as well, there was actually a while that they were wondering whether it was brought over from Peru to Easter Island. However, I believe they found some research recently discrediting that theory and believing that it was brought over prior to all of this, meaning that it was probably brought over by some sort of bird or some other way of migration. Additionally, when we're talking about the island, we're referring to an actual boat floating platform with a little village on top of it. I don't want anybody to think that I'm just referring to a small little, the equivalent of putting a tent in the back of a pickup truck. That's not what I'm talking about. This is actually a literal floating platform that you can walk among and in between all of the structures. It is a village. But moving on to creatures, I am ending this episode on a rather rare note. I am actually going to talk about one of the creatures that call the lake home, not my favorite lake monster, because one is actually currently undergoing efforts by scientists to save its life. So it has a rather rude nickname that I'm not allowed to say and keep my show rating, but it is called the Lake Titicaca giant frog, or Helamobius cutilus. It is the largest frog that lives only in the water. So not the largest frog ever, but the largest aquatic. And it has loose, baggy skin that comes in a bespeckled and marble effect. Currently, I saw it mentioned that the body, excluding the leg, will sometimes be up to 14.5 centimeter or 5.7 inches long and live anywhere in the lake up to 100 meters or 330 feet deep. Unfortunately, these cute little guys are facing effects from mining and development. The reason I bring it up is that frog species are considered to be what biologists call indicator species in the environment. Dusting off my old biology degree for a second, indicator species are normally the first species in an area to be affected by things. So, if there's an increase in pollution or toxins in the environment, you can normally see a corresponding decline in the numbers of the wild frog populations, hence indicators. They show whether an environment is good or bad. Good environment, surplus of frogs. Bad environment, no more frogs. So, if you as designers are evaluating the health of an existing condition, this is actually one of the studies I would highly encourage you to look up for that region. Now, I can almost see you listeners asking, why do we need to know that as designers? Well, if you are participating in a revitalization project or designing a landscape or park or any hundreds of variations like that, this actually might be a sign of a larger environmental issue that might not be addressed, and that could majorly impact the success of your project. I do actually have a real world example that has nothing to do with this area but I know someone who wants to remain anonymous but wanted to share their story, who was fresh out of school a few decades ago and into their first real office architect job. They were placed on their first LEAP project, and the task was to design a park to accompany the building that the rest of the team was working on. They didn't realize that there was a pre-existing environmental damage from another lot up the street that was missing in the original reports. They said that altogether several thousands of dollars of high-end plants were lost because the toxins in the soil were too high for them to survive, because they weren't using phytoremediation plants or plants designed to combat the issue, but instead using ornamental plants. And just a quick aside for anybody who doesn't know, phytoremediation is a method that we use in landscaping or anywhere, multiple fields actually, to use plants to pull up and address toxins. And it covers a wide variety of different techniques. Some the plants directly pull it up into their leaves, and then you destroy the plants and the metals are in the leaves. It just kind of depends upon the situation. An ornamental plant is, like the name suggests, something that's cultivated for its attractiveness or for its aesthetic value. Ornamental can actually cover a wider range of plants than I think people realize. But most of the time, or at least in this story, it's an extremely delicate to start. This is not always true for all ornamental plants, just in the case of the story. But the thing that they mentioned seeing was a lot of dead amphibians, small mice, and creatures that everyone originally assumed were dying because of the previous owners putting down poisons years before. But once again, a big thank you to all my listeners. I know I say this every week, but please rate and review. If you liked it, loved it, hated it, let me know. I love feedback and hearing from everyone, and more importantly, sparking conversation. We again have a Facebook page and private group, both of which are under the same name, Architecture, Coffee, and Ink, which is again a pretty young podcast. architectureinc.design.blog is the website, and everything will be linked in the show notes. I will be posting the transcript and some images on the blog later in the afternoon, so please keep an eye out for that. But as always, may your coffee mugs be full and your inkwells never run dry.